Hello, today I'm going to show you how to build a dynamic web application backed up by a MySQL database and using the Java standard tag library. So this is a web project. In order to make any sense of this video, you need to know some Java. You need to have worked a little bit with Java server pages, which are dynamically generated web pages. And you need to know a little bit about database tables and foreign keys. It's not really necessary that you're expert on any of these technologies, but it helps if you know a little bit about them. So here's what we're going to try to attain during this talk. We're going to start with an HTML view. We're going to mock up a web page, and then we're going to use that web page to drive the design of our entire application. At the end, we're going to have this JSP page, which is going to display the information from our database, but without using any Java in the JSP code. So let's begin by mocking up the web view, what the page is going to look like. And by mock-up, I mean that these bands that you're seeing on this page don't come from a database. I just entered these bands and some albums that they made just to see what the page would look like. And so by looking at this page, I can see a couple of things. One is that the display contains bands and the albums that they've recorded kind of as a unit. And then the other thing that we can see is that there's an ability to enter a new band name and enter an album. And there's going to be a whole list of these bands, and each band is going to have a list of its associated albums. So now I'm ready to actually model the data. Now first I'm going to use MySQL database. I'm using the MySQL command line client here, although you could use the MySQL Workbench or phpMyAdmin. I'm fond of the command line client. So first I've got a table band, and each entry in this table is going to be a band. And then secondly, I have a table called album. And of course, each album is an album. So how are the albums linked to the bands? By this field, which is the foreign key field. Now, that's the way it works in MySQL. How does it work over in the Java world? In the Java world, what we've got is a band class, and that band class is going to contain a list of albums that go with the band. This is how we associate a band with the albums that it contains. This thing is called a data transfer object because this is the data that's actually going to be displayed in the JSP page itself. On the bottom you have what's called the data access object. That's the class that's actually going to access the database, and it's going to have this method that returns a list of bands. So remember that in our web page we had a list of bands, and each item in the band list contains a whole bunch of albums as well. So let's go back and look at the web page again. So we see that each one of these entries is a band object, which contains a band name and its album list, and there's going to be a whole list of these band objects. So now that we kind of have that, our next job is going to be to write all this Java code. I'm going to skip over the Java code because this is about JSTL. So I'm assuming that we've got Java code that actually does what we say it would do, and a database that actually has these bands and albums in it. So now what's next? Well, next we've got to set up the Java server pages so that it can use JSTL. JSTL is actually a bunch of Java classes itself that gets compiled into the JSP pages that you write. So if you don't include these jar files, then the Java server simply can't compile all this stuff, and it can't create the JSTL effect that we want. The first thing we have to do is we have to add this unusual directive right inside your JSP page. Now it looks pretty complicated, but fortunately that exact word-for-word directive will be the thing that you put in every single JSP page that you use that's going to use the JSTL capability that we're talking about today. And then down here on the bottom you see the Tomcat lib directory where we've actually installed these JSTL files. Tomcat does not come with these JSTL jar files installed. You've got to find them on the web, you've got to download them, and you've got to put them in your JSTL Tomcat lib directory. But some people have a little problem with that because they don't actually know where their Tomcat lib is. So here's a little trick that you can do with that. Go into your Eclipse, if you're using Eclipse, find the project that actually contains these bands, and then we'll use the little build path configure build path to start adding libraries. So you can add a library. You can use the server runtime library. And you need to use Apache Tomcat because the J2EE preview doesn't work very well with JSTL. So I've already got Apache Tomcat library installed on my system. And then I'm going to open it up and look at the location of all the jar files. A library is a collection of jar files, and so each jar file is at a location. And lo and behold, here are the locations of each one of my jar files. As you see, it's a long path, but it ends in lib. That tells you where the Tomcat lib directory is. So once you figure that out, you download those jar files into that lib directory, and if you've got that Apache Tomcat library in your system, then you've got those Java servlet JSTL jars. Okay, so now we're ready to actually work on the web page itself. So here we are working on the web page. We've got this tag lib directory, and now we're going to attach the database helper class, the one that actually extracts things from the database, as a bean. This is using what we call the model view design pattern, and this design pattern works really well when you've got a web application with only a single web page. So down here over in the list, I've taken away all my dummy bands and albums, and now I'm going to actually create a list. What I like to do when I'm doing anything involved with a loop is to put a loop comment. This loop comment, this is a JSP type comment. What this loop comment does is it says what's going to happen on one iteration of the loop. And so if I've got a whole bunch of bands, then every time this loop iterates, I'm going to produce one band and all the albums that go with that band. So now I'm going to go in there and I'm going to make a loop that does that. Actually, I'm going to start the loop control. I like to right before the comment. So it says C for each. That's my JSTL for each loop. And then inside C for each, what do I have to do? This has got to be inside the tag. I say items equals, so items is equal to all of the items. That's going to be the whole list of bands. That's going to be band helper. Now what's band helper? Band helper is this guy right there. That's what I'm calling the helper class dot band list. And what that does is it is a reference to the method in band helper that says get band list. So that's the whole thing, band helper dot band list. We're using expression language here. And now that's many of them. One of those items is going to be called band. Var equals band. So this isn't an expression language, it's actually creating a new variable. Name of the imported scoped variable. So down in here, I'm going to put the end of my for each. And I'm now going to put what? An li element, and then I'm going to have a reference to, this time, band, because band has a property called band name. And where did that band name property come from? It came from the get band name method in the band class. And I can actually look that up, see what's going on. Looks at the band class. The band has it's going to have a method that's a getter method for this field called band name. Okay? So back to the JSP page. All right, so what do we have now? We have a list item with a band name. But inside that, we want to create a whole different list. I want to have an unordered list. And inside this unordered list, it's going to be the album names. So I'm going to create a nested for each loop. And this time the items is going to be what? it's going to be the many things is going to be the band album list. So the band is going to export a property called album list, and then a single one of these is going to be equal to just, I'll call it var equals album. So you see how the one versus many works. For the whole list of bands, one of those lists of bands is a band, and then for the album list, that's a part of a band, one of those is the album. Right? And so then I simply create the album as an list I element. All right, what's the loop comment for that? It's going to be a list item element with the album name. All right? And that's the code that's actually going to make this thing work.